All right, everyone. Welcome back dito sa Deep Dive, latest episode na ating podcast, pinakabardagulan na podcast sa Pilipinas. Yan na lang sabihin ko para neutral na, para hindi matamaan ng iba. Kasi if I say the leading this or leading that, mamaya kung ano sasabihin. Shoutout dun sa isang fan natin kanina, dinaanan natin sa mall. Kung ano-anong sinasabi. Oh, wala naman. It's a healthy competition tong podcasting. Today, we have a very special guest. Of course, si Kaloy. This is the Kaloy without the Chloe, right? This is a Kaloy who I've known for a long, long time. Hopefully one day makilala rin natin, ma-interview natin the other Kaloy, yung ating bayani. But today we have someone who's very special on so many levels because I've been reading his works throughout the years. His works, his organization's works have been really, really a gold mine of very, very unfortunate information, right? About the tragedy in the Philippines. So dahil today is a sacred day, it's a somber day. Alam naman ng tao, I strictly observe Sabbath. So on Sundays, I never do anything political. Today, also normally, I shouldn't be doing anything. But this topic, it's actually not bad. I think it's very relevant because in many ways, we have to honor the memory ng mga libo-libo natin mga kababayan na pinatay. I mean, let's just be honest about it. Who were mass murdered back in the day. So accordingly, kasama po natin today si Kaloy Conde. Carlos Conde, thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Such an important day
Of
for
course,
us.
somber day, important day, a day for reflection, Kaloy, no? I've been meaning to interview for you for quite some time. And then, of course, I realized the other day you launched just your own podcast and you were interviewing, dun sa first interview mo, si Manny Mugato, our very good friend who also elicited a lot of very, I would say, not only positive, but heartfelt reaction. So, Kaloy, maybe for the purpose of our audience, can you tell a little bit about your new podcast? And then we'll talk about you. Mauna muna yung podcast mo, priority.
Sige, sige. Well, I've always wanted to do some podcasts, but because of the limitations of my job, medyo nahihirapan ako. But only recently, with all the things that are happening in this country, I thought, I always weigh in on issues, particularly on human rights. I thought, why not? So this is a personal podcast. You can find it on the usual ways you access your podcast. It's called Podcasting Kaloy. As simple as that muna. It's in Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. You can find it there. Limitado pa lang yung episodes, but we're getting there. Unlike you, Richard, I don't have a gazillion followers, so we're just beginning.
Well, you see the eye bags there. That's because you know what? Imagine I do the day job and then I do this pa on top of it. So, Kaloy, obviously, like Marites Vitog, you're not gonna have a hard time people finding your podcast because I think Marites has been juicing that Marites name of hers nowadays with their own podcast and all, among others, Rappler. So, actually, kayo ni Rappler, no? Kudus, no? Aside from, of course, my own newspaper, Philippine Daily Inquirer, I think all of these have been really a good source for us understanding really the depth of tragedy nung nangyari nung panahon ng Digong. But before we go to the man of the hour, right? Rodrigo Duterte and his war on drugs. Can we talk about your own journey? So I want this to be a bit similar with Manny Mugato's interview. Again, of course, I encourage people to also check your fantastic interview with Manny Mugato. How did you get into this business? My understanding is journalism and background mo, Kaloy.
Yeah, I was a journalist for much of my life, professional life, and then about 12 years ago, jumped into human rights advocacy. I think it was a logical jump for me because I was a journalist for a very long time. Well, 10 years of that, more than 10 years of that with the New York Times. And a lot of my stories were about human rights issues in the Philippines. And then I sort of got sideswiped by all the financial crisis in the US at the time. And then that's the time I jumped onto another career path. As it were. So now I'm here. But human rights has always been central to what I was doing, even when I was a journalist, and more so now.
What years were you with the New York Times?
I was with the New York Times 2001 up to 2010.
Oh, so Obama
Yeah.
and the
Uh,
George Bush days. Oh wow, those were intense
it was
days. I remember that. Yeah,
It was partly because of what happened after 9/11. And remember, we had this war on terror in the
we were
Philippines
the
as a
second front, second global front.
exactly. So that's when I was hired by the New York Times. Before that, I did a little bit of stringing for the Washington Post, but the Times finally got hold of me.
I don't want to talk about Washington Post nowadays. Medyo cancel na yata yung Washington Post, but
Yeah.
we'll park that aside. I don't want to get into the rivalry between the Post and the Times. Kaloy, was there if I may, was there any meron bang nangyari sa buhay mo? Meron bang ibang exposure or meron bang istorya habang journalist ka na doon nagkaroon ka ng inspirasyon na pumasok dito sa trabaho na to, which is really human rights. It's one of the most torturous and difficult jobs as far as civil society work is concerned, right? Especially if it's in the
Yeah.
Philippines.
Sinabi mo, sinabi mo. But there was not one single incident or kind of like an epiphany or something like that. It was all, an accumulation of a lot of, heartaches, as it were, while covering the Philippines. And as I said, much of my stories, probably more than half of it, were about human rights, social justice, and all of that. And that's probably why Human Rights Watch hired me to begin with, because I had that body of work looking into human rights situation in the Philippines. And when you do reporting, when you do journalism that centers on human rights, invariably you will get into a lot of heartaches, moments of really stressful and really mga heart wrenching moments that in a way form you, that makes you what you eventually become. And that's exactly what happened to me. So around 2000, in fact, Duterte had something to do with it. So I had played a role in all of this, in fact.
Can we talk
So I
about
was
that?
living in Davao.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I lived in Davao for 10 years. This was around 1996 onwards, and Duterte was mayor. And one of the first few kind of in-depth pieces that was written about Davao Death Squad was I wrote that for the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. This was around 2000, I think, before I went into, uh,
2000. Year
yeah,
2000. Just at the turn of the millennium. So
yes.
before pa global war on terror, may war on drugs na nangyari sa
Yeah,
Davao. Is that what
yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying?
So I did that. I did that story, and that got noticed as well. So one of the really heartbreaking moments there was when I interviewed this mother, who still communicates to me, by the way, to this day. In fact, yesterday we
Ito yung
exchanged
tatlong teenager na anak niya na pinatay?
apat, apat.
Apat. Oh my God. Yeah, apat. Hindi,
So
yeah.
that was the most difficult thing I did. So and yeah, of all the human rights, I would say, stories that I covered, that was really something that no, that struck me. And in fact, Manny Moggs, if you, I don't know if he mentioned this to you, that was one of the
Yeah.
sa report ng Reuters about that this mother warning them. They asked what do you think if Duterte ran for president? And she said, "Oh my God, sana hindi naman because babahan ng dugo sa buong Pilipinas." And that's exactly what happened. And this was in 2016, an interview niya. So sinulat ko yun for the PCIJ in 2000, and they ran a two-part series and still on the web, I think. But it was really something because imagine mo, apat na anak mo, pinatay, vegetable vendors ka lang. I mean, admittedly, yung mga anak niya, they came in trouble with the law at varying stages of their teenage life.
Petty
And
crimes. Petty crimes.
petty crimes,
At most.
and that was also the time when Duterte was mayor, and he had these people harassing and even arresting students na tumatambay lang. And then there were some instances of people being killed, shot, and in many instances, in fact, one of the four children was killed like a baboy, parang kinatay, literally. Allegedly, ang ginamit ay yung tawag nila doon colonial. This is a kind of butcher's knife na
God, grabe.
dati talaga sa Bangkerohan Market sa Davao. So these things, these stories that really had an impact. It really messed me up quite a bit. And
Wow.
then
I didn't know they were
so
broke. I thought lahat sila, ano lang, barel lang or something. Kinatay
no,
talaga, grabe.
meron.
These are psychopaths.
Particular, yeah, particularly in Davao, meron ka dahil tumatambay sila dun sa what is called the Bangkerohan Market, the main public market there. And marami mga butchers apparently doon. And allegedly, some of the people that the Davao Death Squad was using were ordinary people who knew how to handle knives. So that's the kind of environment that I found myself in for 10 years while Duterte was mayor.
Okay, I think that definitely sets the stage for a discussion today, no? Medyo I thought medyo mag-slow burn tayo. You went right into it. Actually, yung kwento nung ina na yan, no? Apat pala, hindi tatlo. Yun yung isa sa mga nag-struck talaga sa akin. Grabe, nakakatakot naman. Doon mo nakikita talaga na hindi mga big time na criminals ang hinahabol dito eh. Talagang mga petty criminals, mga ganun. But I didn't know it got that brutal na parang talagang Narcos Mexico style, di ba? Um,
Yeah, it was really brutal, and also because what made it so much more, I would say, depressing, Richard, is that the fact that the people in Davao just took it and didn't complain. I mean, it wasn't just because it was Duterte. I mean, he ruled Davao with an iron hand all throughout those years, but also there was an acceptance. I wouldn't even call it a tacit acceptance of what was happening.
you mean
People were.
participatory itong approach dito?
Oh, yeah, exactly. And it was really the horror was magnified by that, by the acceptance, whether tacit or not, by the Davao society. So when they say that the Davao was the safest city in the Philippines at the time, they had a kind of as a twisted reason to believe that, and that kind of stuck, and it resonated with a lot of people in Davao. A lot of them were my friends, and that's just how amazingly horrifying it was. In fact, ngayon, come to think of it, with all these hearings in Congress and the Senate, I'm surprised Mrs. Clarita Alia, the one who lost her four children, is not invited to testify. She should be, because she's still around.
Actually,
She's
yeah, I mean,
free.
I like you mentioning that. Because para sa akin, ang pinakamalaking frustration ko dito is parang halos walang boses yung mga biktima eh. Ang daming journalist sa mga galing nagsalita. Ikaw, Patricia, analyst, political scientists like myself. And lahat tayo nagdadaktak dito. But actually, yung dapat talagang marinig natin dito yung boses ng mga biktima eh. And they're still not platformed enough, if I can even use that term. I don't know if it's appropriate, di ba? Tama ka, I
Yeah.
completely agree with you.
But again, with what happened during the first hearings, Senate last week, do you think she would dare go there, testify there with Bato and Bongo, running the show? I'm not very, very confident that she would, but she might be in the Quadcom if they wanted her.
Yun nga eh. Can you can you believe it, Kaloy? We're we're hitching our wagon of hope on the lower house of like the very
It's
den
it's
of
kind of
Trapones is now our only hope. That's how bad Senate is. Like the Senate is so
sabi ko,
low that the lower house is higher than them. Right? I mean, it's crazy.
initial take ko sa hearing ng isang na podcast was that I suddenly miss Joker Arroyo so much. It's just terrible what's happening.
I mean, it's not just Joker, right? Ang dami nila, di ba?
Or
Miriam Defensor, yes, she's close to Marcus of that. But I mean, we can go on and on, di ba? Vito Salonga,
Daniel
just the whole
Sagisag. Yeah.
unti-unti na naubos yung ganyan ano no na tsunami yung ganyan level of I mean in fairness naman Riza Ontiveros, Laila De Lima, Senator Trillanes, but increasingly they're just lone voices na lang eh, di ba? Back in the day, that was the name of the game.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, in fairness nga to Senator Risa, I mean, she was basically the only voice that's left there. And that's a credit to her insistence that she be heard. Ang mas outrageous pa dito is that some of the colleagues ni Risa, particularly Coco Pimentel, were not very helpful in terms of making sure that the other side of it is heard. Like the other side, when I say the other side being Bato and Duterte, uh, so mas kumili, parang ang naging dating tuloy, mas kumiling sila doon sa Duterte side, which is a pity. Merong mga napunta doon, di ba? I mean, the few ones who testified there was this Cristina Gonzalez, a mother of the victim, and then there was Randy De Los Santos, and then of course there was Dilima. But what did the senators do? Kay Randy De Los Santos, question pa, at inakusahan pa yung kapatid niya na tatay ni Kian na addict daw, excuse the word, dahil lang wala na siyang ngipin o sa itsura niya. I mean, can you believe that? It was
Well,
horrible.
Kaloy, I don't know if you've seen the other hearing yung anak ni Mulak. yung alleged parang sexual assault case.
Yeah, yeah.
Even yung anak ng artista, at some point, victim blame nila. Pinagalitan pa. Ano bang drogang kinuha mo bago ka essentially in sexual assault? So, I'm just telling you, it's that bad. Na
Yeah.
even anak ni Nino Mulak ay some point ay parang, wait, victim blame pa siya pa nga yung biktima ng sexual assault eh. So, I'm telling you, it looks like it's really across the board collapse in
Yeah, it
equality. So,
does.
unfortunately, it's not just this drug war issue. Because I listened to the all their hearing, wondering like, is it eto lang ba, polvoron hiring lang mo? Like, it's really bad. It's like this
Yeah.
Senate is the worst ever. But can I rewind a little bit because Kaloy, um considering how traumatic that experience of covering, wrenching the experience of covering itong nangyari sa Davao in early 2000s, earlier in this century was more than, I mean, almost half a quarter of century ago was what made you uh feel na talaga you have to be full-time committed to the human rights issues. How important is the job of your organization? How important is the job of the civil society in upholding those things? Was the Maguindanao massacre, for instance, a major wake-up call for you? Kasi 2010 na yun, di ba? Paalis ka na, pa-transition ka na eh.
Well,
I
that
just
was
don't
part of it.
understand eh, yeah.
That was part of it, definitely. I also covered that for the New York Times at the time, and that was really, that was really something. But yeah, I went into this job. Here's the thing when you do something like journalism or advocacy, because whether you like it or not, it really does grow on you. I mean, it gets tiring, it gets really depressing, but it's one of those, ito yung klaseng trabaho na once you started doing it and you know that you're on the right path and you know that you're doing something good for the victims primarily, not for yourself, but for the victims, it's tough to extricate yourself from it. And I found that. And so when the opportunity came to for me to work for HRW, as I said, it was a logical jump for me. And I think part of the reason why I chose HR Human Rights Watch is because it's a very credible organization. We around the world, it has done quite a bit of work. It has won the Nobel Prize in the 70s, or I think. Uh, because of its landmines work. In the Philippines, in fact, in 2009, before I went on board, they were the first ones to write a major report on the Davao Death Squad. I was not part of that yet, but they were the ones who did that. This was
Human Rights Watch.
yeah, Human Rights Watch, and this was one of the documents that Senator Lila used when she started to investigate Duterte, the Davao Death Squad in 2009. So that kind of history, that kind of heft ng kanilang trabaho, that was what attracted me to it and also made me feel comfortable doing it to this day.
Yung robustness no nung kanilang commitment dun sa trabaho nila and all. I,
Technology, the discipline, and the you know the the professionalism that's in it.
Kalaya, I want to go back again to this Davao issue kasi ako, one of the biggest concern I had with a lot of writings about Duterte back in the day, and I think Duterte's factotum apologies didn't also help, is this kind of orientalization of Davao. It's like, oh, Davao is this kind of like wild, wild east, and like people there are like this and that. And ako naman, my understanding sociological is because dumaan sila dun sa Nicaragua phase nila, di ba? No, essentially, far-right, fascist, proto-fascist group versus NPA and all. And as we know from documentary evidence, eventually nag-horseshoe effect yan, di ba? And Duterte brought all these elements together and that became your Davao Death Squad, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that psychology? I don't know. I'm not a Bisaya background, but Bisaya scholars I talk to or Mindanao-based scholars I talk to, they tell a lot about yung how the specific historical circumstances of Davao allowed for this rise of this, let's just call it Dutertismo, right?
Yeah.
Phenomenon whereby it's not just the guy on top. As you said, it's a participatory autocracy, if I put it even mildly, right? Like, andon
Yeah.
yung butcher dan sa, andon yung kung sino-sino mga informant, kung sino-sino sumasali, from right wing, left wing. So it's kind of like a social pact. Some
Yeah.
would even say a blood pact, right? Can you tell me what is your understanding of that sociological and historical context? Because I want to demystify Na it's not like Davao people came from another planet. They're also kababayan natin. They're just one of us. It's just that Davao had these special circumstances, and then people like Duterte came in and made the most out of it.
Yeah, you got it right, I think. Look, Davao or even Mindanao or some other places outside of Metro Manila are the perfect laboratory for the kind of leadership, for the kind of politician like Duterte. You know, probably much more than other areas, air, cities or areas in Mindanao. Um, they faced quite a bit of challenge in terms of understanding the politics, but also much more so in terms of, you know, ordinary pang-araw-araw na kabuhayan. They for some there's a sense that the problems of Philippine society are much more acute in these communities outside of Manila, particularly in Mindanao, where poverty, conflict, is quite common. And so, it's not difficult to sell the idea that our place is so badly run, our place is so crime infested, our place is so poor that, hey, I'm here, I'm going to rescue you from all of this. It's not a tough sell, to be honest. And people in Davao, and I don't think it has anything specifically to do with being this Visayan. Uh,
I
but
mean,
I think,
Cebuanos are not like that. They're very different. I mean, like,
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
I think it's just this reality across the board, across the Philippines, that we still live in a society that's a tad too feudalistic sometimes. Our dynastic politics is much more pronounced in these areas, in outside of Manila. So, maraming problema na hinaharap ng taong bayan na people in Manila might just ignore, but in places like Davao, in places like Bukidnon, or many of these depressed areas, minsan their search for answers and solutions is much more difficult. And then somebody comes along like Duterte, who knows how to, you know,
Essentially
who
warlord, no? I mean, he's essentially warlord in a highly urbanized, developed area. I mean, there are many other politicians in Mindanao we can name who are, just look at the Maguindanao massacre, among others, right? Pero Davao kasi, it's such a rich, developed, urbanized city, no? So yung platform mo, ang laki eh.
Yeah, and also I
Is you
think what
prominent.
what came in hand with that is the total absence or lack of accountability for these type of things. I mean, it's just people rule with impunity. In Davao, nobody questioned the Duterte. I mean, they practically invented the whole idea of intelligence or confidential funds for years. Davao had that. I mean, when I was there, people always say, "Oh, napaka ano ng Davao." Napaka tahimik and all of that. But Davao was the most militarized city I've ever been in. Every corner meron mga nakasundalong full battle gear kahit sa mall na hindi lang gwardiya,
Armored
pati mga
vehicle, my tanks, yeah.
that's where all the money from the intelligence funds go. It's for decades now andyan yung Task Force Davao because the idea nga was that we're so insecure that we need these a show of arms. So yeah,
Not
it's
to
and
mention
Duterte is saying
surveillance. I've been to Davao. I went to that yung CCTV center nila. Like, next
uh-huh.
level, di ba? They use ito mga advanced Huawei na talagang pwede mo i-zoom sino nandun. So, obviously, there's a
Yeah.
logic to it, right? Because I think in fairness to Vicente Rafael, in his book, yung book niya about Duterte, di ba? Where he analyzed how the brutal state building project in Mindanao, from colonization to Mindanao War to warlordism, not to mention the whole mine and drugs and all of that, nagsama-sama yan to create a very toxic political environment which has been exploited by the Duterte types. And then that creates some sort of a political culture. Kaya sabi ko, that's not a judgment on the people of Davao. It's just an
Oh no,
understanding.
no, no.
Saan sila galing? Saan galing? And
Yeah.
then, if ako,
Anarchy of families nga, di ba? Sabi niya, no?
exactly.
Macaulay. So it's
Exactly.
it's that eh. And also I think on the other hand, you cannot just ignore din naman kung paano ka politically astute si Duterte compared to others. I mean, look, let's just cite one example of how really clever he was. I mean, he was the only mayor who could, meet with generals in the morning and have lunch with the NPA in the afternoon.
And
When
with the generals again in the evening. Like, one day, naka two tours na siya, di ba?
Yeah. So I mean, I can't recall anybody, any politician who can do that. And he maintained quite a bit of close relationship with the communist movement in Davao for so long, and he cultivated that. I mean, it was a quid pro quo, symbiotic thing between them, and obviously it paid off for both of them. I mean, it pains me to see all of it. I mean, this is not a shade on the people of Davao, as you said. I mean, a lot of the people there are good friends, but it's just the it's just environment that
Yeah.
the teachers created, and also obviously this was not, I mean, the seeds of all of this anarchy, of all these things, was planted way before the Dutertes came along. I mean, Mindanao,
Well, I don't
many
see
other
any
parts.
anarchy anymore. I see very much, a kind of a Hobbesian system where napakalinis, napaka-organized ang Davao. I mean, many people would argue that even if in theory, kunyari, I mean, of course, I disagree with that, but even if in theory you say, oh, kailangan mo ng, that kind of kamay na bakal for a while to, like,
Yeah,
Davao has outgrown that need for a long time, if ever there was such a need. It's such a developed, progressive city. I've given talks at Ateneo de Davao. I've been around the city. Wonderful people, amazing people, wonderful people. So you don't need Duterte types anymore. These are like for very low levels of development societies where talagang anarchy, na talagang giyera and all of that. So that's where you're correct. Now, the reason why they're still there, even
yeah,
if they're not needed, assuming they were ever needed, is because of the political skill. Lele Claudio, a good friend of Historiman, said, ang pinaka-idol daw ni Digong is, you know who? Si Benigno Aquino, the younger
oh,
version. Because
wow,
remember, the Benigno Aquino is the guy who can talk to the communists in the
yeah,
evening, and then the next day in the U.S. Embassy talking to the U.S. ambassador, and who knows who else, right? He was
yeah,
this synthesizers, right? He was a
yeah,
very astute, if not sleazy politician before he became the heroic redemptive figure he became later. In fact, on our show, we had Bam Aquino, and even si Bam, aminado siya, the younger Benigno was really your trapo on steroids, but very astute Machiavellian, right? So
yeah.
Digong actually look up to that version. He really thought yun yung dexterity, di ba? The ability to talk from 10 sides of your mouth and put things together. Yun yung galing niya. So this is where the man meets the moment. The moment
Yeah.
was there, but the man took over the moment and then created his own political reality.
Well, obviously, Duterte is cruder than all the others combined in terms of acting that out, in
He's a
terms of.
poor copy. Yes.
But just on the idea that Davao is a progressive city, I have no question about that. It certainly had this veneer of being a very cosmopolitan, being, rich, and things like that. But underneath it, underneath that veneer, bubbles this kind of you know almost parang tawag dito, napaka pathological na na tendency to use violence, to use I, I think Digong has somehow perfected the art of using violence, even if it didn't come from the usual ones like military or the police, even if it came from the masses or the ordinary folks, to use it and kind of convert it into something politically advantageous to him. And I think that the talent of Digong is in that. And he also made a lot of people feel that when he does this, I mean, he seems to say that I'm doing this in your name, but really this is something that needed to be done, and people just nod in assent. So it's a really horrifying thing, to be honest.
Um, I heard from one Middle Eastern country, I won't say which country, someone said something like, the misfortune of this country is the most talented politicians are actually the most religiously fundamentalist and all of that, right? And I would say in the Philippines, the misfortune is the most talented politician we have is someone like that, who some would say is a proto-fascist, right? Not only an authoritarian, but proto-fascist figure. Kasi grabe, di ba? I told someone who's working on a novel about what happened about Duterte, I said the best way to describe the reaction of the opposition or liberals is they didn't even know what hit them, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
And now let's talk about that. Duterte becoming the president of the Republic of the Philippines. I mean, I don't know. I remember very well in August of 2015, we had this bottom line show with Tito Boy, no? And I was there with a couple of other political scientists. So even Leloy can attest to that. Everyone asked about different candidates. Back then, si Binay was number one, and Gracepa was coming up as a dark horse. Digong was not even in the conversation.
Yeah.
But I said he's the dark horse. Because I always said, what makes us Filipinos immune to, giving a chance to someone like that? Marcos had 20 years his way before he was kicked out, right? And even that was, that many factors came together. We had ERAP before that. Look at how far Arroyo went. So I always felt, and this is where the feudalism argument comes in, right? That in highly unequal societies, when you have a very small middle class, you have a lot of inequality and social injustice. When you have a media that sensationalizes news every day, patay, patay, patay on TV Patrol, it's just a matter of time before people will go for some demagogic figure who just
Yeah.
knows how to manipulate media and get him there. And when I saw Digong the first time, I said, the first time I properly analyzed Digong was his interview with Maria Ressa. It was a long interview. And I said, who is this guy? I mean, of course, I knew about Digong Digong. I mean, like the caricature. But once I listened to him, and then I was teaching in LaSalle back then. He came to LaSalle. He was the only one who showed up dun sa the president I want, something like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thanks to Maria Ressa, I got to know a lot about Duterte. Like, this guy is kind of outside the box. And I remember later on, a Davao journalist who was a critic of Duterte told me, actually, nung bata siya, mas matalino pa to. Sobrang daldal, magaling. He can talk about Hegelian dialectics one moment. He can talk about guns, girls. I mean, this guy is he has a very playful and creative mind. Unfortunately for so I always felt you cannot underestimate that person and the ability of these people to take advantage of grievances. Very
Yeah.
legitimate grievances. So I want to talk about this because you transition to Human Rights Watch from high-level journalism during Aquino's time. And
Yeah.
according to the quote-unquote Dilao liberal narrative, Aquino's time, wonderful time, amazing time, everything moving well, like great time, paradise. And I would say like, yeah, if you're a middle-class Filipino and you're in our circle, like I'm doing the World Economic Forum, I'm talking to the Bloomberg, yes, it looked like the amazing time for you're reading books like Breakout Nations by Ruchir Sharma. But
Yeah.
you go slightly outside that bubble, a lot of grievances was building up in the provinces, in the north, the pro-Marcos people, where my people come from, in the south, Mindanao felt still ignored. And then the Mamasapano happens. And dami, traffic, Yolanda, all of these things were coming to you get Yolanda, then Mamasapano, then gonna. So I just felt we were primed for that. But let's talk
Yeah.
about human rights situation even during Pinoy. What is your read of the Pinoy interregnum, if I can call it that way, before the storm really hits the Philippines?
Well, before I answer that, actually, Richard,
Please.
I've been telling people, diplomats included, who were like scratching their heads over Duterte. This was 2016, 2017. I always tell them my line, which is that if the gong didn't happen, we would have had to invent him. That's the story of this country. He was like a boil that was ready to pop, and excuse the crude comparison, but that's just how it was. But Pinoy, I mean, I think a part of that is that there's always this Cory mystic around him, right? Cory and even mystic around him, and then that's undeniable, I think. But it's a lot of human rights violations were happening under him. In fact, I remember when he took office, we were quite heavy on him, criticizing or
I know,
telling
I know.
this is an opportunity for you to really clean up the human rights situation in the Philippines. And he was coming from a regime that had really some serious human rights problems as well. So I'm not saying that the problems in human rights in Pinoy was something that happened only when he became
General
president.
Palparan and all of those people
Yeah,
from
exactly, because
Arroyo.
it's all inherited. But the problem is that it's not so much that these things happen or that they exist. When you're president, a lot of what people expect from you is what you intend to do to fix that, what you would do to fix that. So this is the reason why, even when he was just about to run, the issue of Hacienda Lucita came up. and why the Aquino and Cojuangco family had never managed to resolve that. So that was the context of Noynoy, and I think it also resonated to a lot of people that okay, ito na naman tong anak ng hasyendero and yet meron pa mga problema, and then so kung ihahambing mo yung si Ninoy tsaka sa this nascent Digong, uh, kita mo talaga yung contrast. Kita mo yung kung saan yung kung saan yung kumbaga parang saan mas kikiling yung ordinary Pilipino na everyday still struggling to make ends meet, and then every day had to confront abuses, big or small, things like that. So I mean the dysfunction in our country from criminal justice, justice system has always been there, but I think it's as I said, it's not so much that these are happening. Sometimes the disillusionment comes when they view their leader as being too passive and uncaring, and I
Aloof.
think
Aloof.
aloof, tone deaf, and that's I think what
Sabi mo pa.
Pinoy had. So again, it was only a matter of time before Duterte just pops up and take the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I was just showing some numbers because I wrote a book about Duterte, and I said when I was writing the book, it just dawned on me like, wait, 85% of all legislative offices, political dynasties, 40 richest family taking home 76% of newly I went through the statistics and said, wait, why didn't we have a Duterte earlier? I mean, like, in what universe is this a functional democracy, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
always tell people, for all the progress you see in the BGC and Makati, look at the squatter areas around the BGC and Makati na lumaki din sila. It just tells you about even the growth is dysfunctional. It is not inclusive. I remember a conversation I had with President Aquino, and my sense with Pinoy was he was a well-intentioned guy. I think he had the right intentions and all of that. And but one area where I think it didn't work is he wanted to be that kind of almost a someone told me he's a fan of German politics. So he thought it could be something like Angela Merkel, kind of above the fray, respectable and all. When I think what we needed was someone who had kind of a Berlusconi kind of a Latin, you know what I'm saying? Because we're a Latin Asian
Somebody who
society.
gets his hands dirty.
Exactly. So, for instance, I think you took issue with something I wrote about Mama Sapano and all, and I told him, you should have gone there and hugged the families and express your remorse and all. And essentially, I think his idea was like that's not what the head of like this is sensationalizing it. But my point, this is the Philippines. This is not Germany. This is not Sweden. I know those countries have fantastic political party system compared to us. Obviously, everything is relative, but you have to dapat in tune siya sa katotohanan on the ground. So, speaking of facts on the ground, it's not just the kotong, it's not only the anxiety, it's not only the crime, it's also that culture, emotional culture we have. And that's where the tone deafness also
Yeah, I
perception.
think also I think that around this time, yung kay I have to caveat this with saying I'm not a sociologist, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm just this ordinary person observant of what's happening, no? So I like to put it that baka sabihin ng mga tao dito ayun si Conde nag-ano ano naman
No, but we're all autodidacts, right?
yeah.
Because we have to
So,
make sense out of this. This is
yeah.
crazy what has been happening. Yeah.
But the thing is that people were just so the distant from the political from the politics and from the politicians,
Formal politics, formal
formal
politics.
politics, their leadership. They were just so distant, and this alien, and not just even distant. Sometimes I think that they feel alienated,
Alienated, yeah.
and that's something that somebody like Duterte, given his rhetorical style, given his bombastic way of presenting himself, can easily go to town with in terms of okay, you have this really tawag nila sa kay Pinoy dati mga talawan or what na president na walang sympathy, walang mababa ang EQ, mga things like that, right? And that really, again, that really
Manhid, even some would say,
and
yeah.
he that really resonated with a lot of people, and it's not as if Pinoy was doing something so awfully corrupt or awfully
No, he was a clean guy. He was
yeah.
not corrupt personally, yeah.
But to I guess you could say that to poor Filipino families, they probably admire more somebody who doesn't hide his corruption, but is able to connect with them in so many on so many levels. So, and that's Digong, and that's how.
The relatability, the compassion factor. I mean, that's politics. Charisma. That's charisma.
I mean, he hit all of the right targets. I mean, he was going against oligarchs. He was railing against political dynasties, no matter how hypocritical that is today. That sounds today, but he hit all the right notes in terms of presenting
Yeah.
himself to the public. I'm going to go hard against crime. I'm going to demolish these oligarchs, things like that. So, and nobody. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, here, but nobody, I think, at least running for president, had that kind of had that kind of rhetorical flourish to what you call this, to push these issues above and make them the real issues. He's not romanticizing what an ordinary Filipino feels on the ground. He's making that an issue. He's not saying, oh, kawawa ka naman, kaya ganito yun. But no, he's just saying, oh, kawawa ka, sige, patayin natin yung gumawa dyan sa'yo. And that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there was this very famous American TV show that reached out to me, and they were doing background research on Duterte, and they told me, what is it that we don't know about Digong? I said, that's exactly what we have. This is a guy who apparently has a more open progressive policy on LGBTQ, on people who are working in the sex industry in Davao. This is a person who talks about historical injustice against Muslims in Mindanao, and says you know what I'm saying? Like, he has that side. Sabi ko, the only person I can think who has that kind of dexterity is Juan Peron, right? One day with military,
Yeah.
the other day with labor union, and then brings
Well, you
over
can
the
call,
wife, right?
yeah,
Peronismo.
you can call it dexterity, Richard, but I
Yeah,
call it
dexterity. Yeah.
really just being cunning. I mean, really just
Oh,
knowing
absolutely.
what the issues are. I don't think he has any principled position in anything. I mean, he claims to be a pro LGBT, for instance, for women, and all of these things, but I don't think any of those kind of positive values that he wanted to imbibe for himself or to present to the public are real. I think here's the thing with Dugong. He's one person who knows exactly kung sino yung kaharap niya and knows exactly what to tell him. Knows exactly the stuff that that guy in front of him wants to hear or likes to hear.
So
That's
he's a
him.
predator.
He is.
He's
And
a
maybe
predator. That's how
yeah.
predators are, right? They smell your weakness. They know what entices you. They bring you in. It's a predator, essential predator, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's in the more, physical realm or political realm or intellectual, he's a predator, right? I heard the same thing about other demagogic figure. You can guess who are the other figures I have in mind. Um, I completely agree with you because ako naman, it was so easy to understand Duterte because I saw it happen in other countries. Erdogan taking over Turkey after everyone lost faith in the more Western-oriented, let's join EU, you know what I'm saying, the liberals in Turkey, the so-called White Turks. And then guess when Erdogan run for mayor of Istanbul, ano yung in translation in English is, he is one of us. Atento
Yeah.
pre.
To pray. Yeah.
When I read the other one's biography, it's like, wait lang, para magkaroon ng plagiarism dito. And then I can talk about Narendra Modi of India, right? The same swashbuckling, controversial, someone who couldn't even go to US for years because of alleged involvement in pogrom. I mean, like, this is crazy. All of them from executive, mayor, governors move up. So I felt if this happens in Turkey or India or even Indonesia to a certain degree under Joko Widodo, why not the Philippines? So I was absolutely not surprised with someone like him coming up. Nevertheless, what makes Digong most unique, even among all these demagogues or right-wing populists, whatever you want to call them, what makes him unique is just the scale of mass atrocities. I mean, just tens of thousands of people. As I told people, I gave a talk before at the youth summit, and this was in that parang yung stadium dyan sa Mall of Asia. So someone told me the
Mhm.
capacity is 25,000. And I look around, so I said, oh, so if you put all the dead people under drug war, it could fill up this whole stadium. You know what I'm saying? So
That's
the scale, so it's just not number. I could imagine if all of these people were
visuals.
killed, that it dawns on you like, oh my God, that's how many people were killed. That's the number of people who were massacred and murdered. So I want to ask you, Kaloy, Did it surprise you, the scale? Or was it like intellectually unsurprising but still emotionally shocking? Because it happens to a lot of us. Like, I'm not surprised, but I'm still
I'm
shocked.
shocked.
Like
Yeah.
it's that paradox, right?
That's I mean, the same thing happened to me. I'm not surprised because he did that in Davao on a smaller scale, when he was mayor. So a lot of killings there, hundreds, probably even thousands, were being killed right off the streets. And this is something that I really warned against about in 2015 when he was really contemplating on running for mayor, which is that, look, why are you voting for this guy? He has demonstrated in Davao that he is capable of mass murder, of doing all of these things. But people said, oh, I don't know, baka ang feeling ng mga tao, I mean, he can't be that bad. I mean, who would do such a thing? But the thing about Ligong is that it's not just the rhetoric. The one thing that differentiates him from any other demagogues is that he actually does what he says he's gonna do. So, and that explains all of those dead bodies, and that's also where a lot of the support, a lot of the admiration emanates. So it's 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 a it's a sick alchemy of rhetoric, and political bravado, and also the willingness to use violence to advance those.
To what degree was disinformation a big factor? Because a lot of our journalist friends have been harping on this for quite some time. As you know, on Twitter, I get into fight with a lot of people, and one of my biggest issue was this is not just disinformation, right? I mean, you're ignoring the roots of the problem. You're just looking at the amplifying factors, right? But if there were no grievance, disinformation wouldn't be as effective. And if you want to talk about education, then it's the education institutions na kulang sa critical thinking and all of that. Then mas malalim na problema yan. No, but nevertheless, disinformation played a role, right? So what is your understanding of that? Kasi kanina we said, okay, Davao ganito nangyari kaya ganyan ganyan. But how come Duterte was able to implement this on the national scale with, well, officially, what, 90% approval ratings? So how did it go from Davao to national so seamlessly? What is your understanding of that?
I think it would be very simplistic to just uh, uh, tawag dito, to just chalk it
Reduce it to
all
disinformation.
disinformation. Because, I mean, 2015, even in Davao, the social media at the time, 2015, was not that, still not that great. I mean, there was some social media. And in fact, I remember that the one of the first kind of product of this information in Davao is the survey from some website that says Davao is the safest city in the Philippines, and that, they pushed that Facebook and everything, and then they ate it up, and then, so you can say that that was disinformation, and it is disinformation, right?
Switzerland of it.
Yeah. So but again, that if you just focus on this information, you're actually ignoring the more serious aspect of this, which is that there's a whole bunch of issues that's bubbling under the surface. The problem is that they're not, and this is the kind of the paradox here. A lot of people, a lot of ordinary folks who sort of admired Duterte were actually sore that their plight, in terms of crime, in terms of being economically disadvantageous, is not going up. It's not filtering out to the mainstream media, to the political elites and all of that. So it's again that sense, I think, of being neglected is strong,
So they
and
felt seen by Duterte, in effect, if you can
that's
use that woke
exactly it.
term.
That
Yeah.
explains, in fact, why in that key moment with Maria Ressa, when he was the only one who appeared on stage, that was his moment, and I think that explains why. I think, by many accounts I've read, I think that interview, that guesting, was what kind of crystallized the image of other Filipinos about Duterte. Oh, bakit hindi nila alam itong taong to, ginagawa
Actually,
na
that's
pala
what I'm
niya to.
saying. Thanks to
Yeah,
Rappler, we got to know a lot about, like, he actually came off good. I'll be
yeah,
honest. Like, yung parts na when he discussed US and China, I was quite impressed with how he was actually very nuanced. He said something like, andyan naman ng US, hindi naman mawala, but it's time for us to diversify. Kaya sabi ko na ba, ang nag-iisip naman tong isang to, di ba? So you realize this guy, he can switch. He's shapeshifter. He can
yeah.
become this caricaturish, demagogic, and at the same time, he can also be very nuanced and all. You know where else I nahuli ko siyang ganyan? So there was an interview by CGTN China. This is around February 2016. They interviewed me, Grace Po, and Duterte for the first time I saw Duterte speaking straight English, almost perfect grammar, walang mura, maayos yung sagot and all. Sabi ko, yung pala, kaya pala niya na maayos eh. And in fact, kami ni Lelo, we simultaneously came out with this conclusion. Ginaya niya si General Luna. I don't know if you watch that movie, General Luna, nagmumura si Luna. Kasi I know
Yeah.
si Tigong in Davao and all, hindi yung PI yung ginagamit nilang pagmumura. There are many other terms that our Bisaya brothers use. So I felt there was a lot of contrived
Colorful.
authenticity, if I can use that term there. So magaling tong tao to. Sabi ko, magaling siya. I mean, it's not just Gabonada, Cambridge Analytica. That guy
Yeah.
was a natural. He knew how to do it himself. No, someone asked me, is he Machiavelli? I said he's more like a joker. It's like, no, he's not
No,
Machiavelli, he's Joker. It's like
sabi ko nga sa'yo, he has this really keen understanding of sino yung sa harap niya. So, and he adjusts to that.
human. He's a student of human nature.
And that works. So if he can probably humor you if you're a diplomat, humor you with, while sipping wine and all of that. But the next day, in front of some audience in Tondo, he'll use profanity like
Yeah, he
never.
literally did that, right? So first he
Yeah,
talks about metamorphosis. I'm a statesman, gonna. The next day he goes to Tondo and essentially calls for extrajudicial killing. I mean, we saw that. He
yeah.
literally did that. Within 24 hours, he showed 10 sides of himself. Now, Kaloy, I think we did a lot of amateur sociology over the past hour. Because I'm a political
Yeah.
scientist, not a sociologist. Na baka magalit yung mentor natin. Tanong ko na lang si Walden. No, going back to this. Was it a scam? What is the whole war on drugs? Because some would say it was a merger, essentially. Because I had some DDS friends who told me, sabi niya, Richard, alam mo yung Kuratong Balele na story? Sabi ko, oo, bakit? Actually, okay lang naman sa akin kung pinapatay lang yung yung Karebal kasi at least centralized na. Maayos na daw yung distribution. So, hindi that was a very weird argument I heard. Like there are people who admitted that he's really not eliminating it, he's consolidating the business model so that it's more like it went that level of crazy. What is your understanding of the so-called drug war of Digong? For
Well,
show, something
well, if
sinister,
we
conspiratorial, what was going on?
if we assess it, if we assess it using the stated purpose, then it's a scam. I mean, obviously, the drugs are still happening even today. Pinagpapatay na raw yung mga drug lords and all that, but it's still happening. So, but I think also it was a scam in that sense, but also it was a very, very convenient problem that Duterte just used. I mean, we've talked about this for the past hour on that, but also I think this demonstrate just how poor our drug policy is in terms of really looking at the drug problem in a much more holistic and rights respecting way. I mean, you've heard about harm reduction, right? So that's something that hasn't gotten traction in the Philippines, but that should
Oo nga,
be
no?
what's even done. Looking at the drug problem from
Are you talking about
health.
Portugal? You the model in Portugal, for instance? Like,
Exactly, Portugal and some other European countries. Looking at it from a health perspective, but also in a human rights respecting manner. I mean, that's probably easier said than done, given that we have a really serious drug problem, but also the thing is that just wasn't any kind of discourse around harm reduction even before the 30 came along, and so it was easy therefore to demonize people who use drugs. I mean, just Richard, think about this. Studies have shown, and this is something that the UNODC has put forth, 80% of drug users around the world, and that includes the Philippines, obviously, do not need intervention. These drug users, they, perform normally. They do not need treatment or rehabilitation. But when you
you're
hear
talking about
Duterte,
just to be clear, for people to understand, no? So you're talking about, I don't know, a sales lady or a truck driver who may need here and there a little bit of a boost so that they can get through their work. Because many people are saying, a lot of people are
yeah,
using it's because they need to do so difficult work. Sa sobrang hirap ng trabaho nila, kailangan nilang gising pa sila through the night, etc. So it's actually, these are not only small-time drug users, these are quote-unquote small folks, right, who are so desperate that they need to work extra time all the time. So out of desperation, they're using this small, but nevertheless, they're not like zombies and all of that Duterte talks
They're
about.
not like zombies. I mean, that's part of that, but also another part of that is the view that even if you just use marijuana, for instance, a small bit of it, under our laws, that can have dire consequences to you. So we have a very draconian, very severe anti-drug law that that's not addressing the problem. So in fact, to the credit of this administration, Marcos administration, they started a discourse on drug policy and law reform, which is good. Now, the question now is, I mean, this is with UNODC and some other human rights groups, but the question now is kung paano nila talaga i-implement ito. So, panahon ni Duterte, there's none of that. I mean, you have politicians, for instance, that allergic sa kanila yung phrase na harm reduction. They just don't see drugs as a public health issue. They see it as a crime, public safety issue, and then they seize on that. So, dito nang gagaling yung mga demonizing, yung tinatakot ang publiko may rape, baka naka-drugs, di ba? Lalo sa media ngayon, laging tinatanong niya, naka-drugs ba yan? Parang ang dating tuloy na lahat ng mga taong gumagamit ng drugs, talagang ano na, but walang-wala na sa sarili. When in fact, again, sabi ko nga sa iyo kanina, about 80% of drug users are okay. They don't need treatment or rehabilitation. So, ang ano diyan is kung an kung ang tanong pa diyan is bakit madaling ma-manipulate ng mga politician itong drug use. I think part of that is because yung nga hindi pinag-uusapan ang harm reduction, walang respeto, hindi tinitingnan yung drug users nga as pwede pang maayos,
Essentially, they're dehumanized. I mean,
dehumanized.
I mean, the way Duterte and his supporters talk about it, like they're subhumans or even worse.
And it was so easy to do that because walang existing at the time, walang existing any consciousness about the fact that it's not true, about the fact that there's another way to do this. Now, there has not been a single around the world successful drug war. The United States has shown how a failure it is, but now we've been kind of emulating these other countries with
The
disaster.
Colombian president, right? The one
Yeah,
who's featured in Narco series, the one who was fighting Medellin, I mean, the drug cartel in Medellin. He wrote the New York Times op-ed, right? He
yeah.
was beseeching Digong, please do not commit the same mistake I did. Look at what happened in Colombia. It didn't solve the problem. Eventually, the
So
problem was solved in other ways, right? Combination of
again,
incentive system, etc. So, and minura-mura lang niya. He didn't listen to it. No one listens to these people. What I want to understand, Kaloy, is bakit sa tingin mo hindi nagre-resonate yan eh? I remember when I talk about the Portugal model, the immediate answer I got, Portuguese yan, European, ibang lahi yan. Diba? Tapos I look at the data and statistics. I said, look at it. Hindi naman cocaine ang ginagamit ng mga tao at ito yung effect ng ganun. Tapos hindi, iba yung dugo ng Pinoy. Like I've
uh,
heard the most ridiculous arguments na yung mga scientific studies daw hindi applicable. Essentially, the implication is, hindi, kailangan patayin yan. Wala nang solusyon yan. Patayin na yan. Ganun yung mind. Ubusin, di ba? Remember yung term,
yeah,
ubusin na yan, ubusin. That for me is fascist. That's
yeah,
fascist. Because it's
exactly.
a dumb, simplistic, and violent way of quote-unquote solving a problem. I always tell my friends, I don't know about your impressions. And honestly, is it worth, ano yun, parang for you to feel safe, kailang patay na lang kahit sino dyan? I mean, doesn't that say something about you that you need people to be killed so that you feel safe? I
And
mean,
don't they realize the absurdity in that? You
I mean,
know, it,
that's next level crazy, right? Para lang you feel good, dapat maraming mapatay. Even if alam mo na hindi mo mapagkatiwalaan yung mga police or mga, I mean, di ba, remember when we had death penalty, a study came out that said that probably more than 90% of people who were put on the death penalty role were innocent because our
yeah,
justice system is so broken. So imagine Digong deployed a highly corrupt, problematic system to deal with the problem, and then you're saying you trust that they went after the right people? And then
yeah,
sorry na lang kung collateral damage. Sabi ko, kung sorry na, imagine if ikaw yung collateral damage or yung anak mo, yung kapatid mo, or yung tatay mo, collateral damage. So for me, I feel that's worst form of elitism and feudalism. Complete dehumanization of other people. Just for you
that's
to feel good. Feel good.
you're absolutely correct there. And I think the main problem here is not so much that people don't care. I think the leadership, our political leadership, has for decades now, they not only ignore the realities of the drug situation, but even exploited it for political purposes. And it's not just Duterte. Dito mo makikita yung kung gaano ka kasi ano na na-plant na sa mentality ng public na drug use is, that leads to violence, that leads to family disintegration and all of that. Diba?
I
Sa
mean, there are
media.
cases we cannot deny. There are some cases,
Yeah,
but it's
but
not like
again,
90% of yeah.
that doesn't justify the murder of 30,000 people,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly, including 155 children based on some of the data I saw. Like, you tell me how
yeah,
you
so
justify that.
it's that. So, ang sinasabi ko, nasa kamay ng political leadership yung failure na to eh. Kasi if they're really serious about the problem, they should have taken the lead in terms of educating the public about drugs and why we need harm reduction, why we need a human rights-based approach to doing it. Instead, what they do is they take it, they use it as a boogeyman, and there you go. That's it. So hanggang ngayon wala pang ganong level ng pag-iintindi sa drug problem. Now, we hope na magkakaroon through the efforts of human rights groups and harm reduction groups and led by the UNODC, but I think that will take some time.
Again, speaking of statistics and numbers, when I was writing my book on Duterte back in 2016-17, what I realized is that, first of all, sobrang baba yung usage ng mga crazy drugs like cocaine and all of that. Although there were some reports of Sinaloa making some inroads in this part of the world. A lot of shabu was being used, but this is by the poorest community. And a lot of that comes from China.
Yeah.
And the very country that Duterte loves. So actually, if Duterte really wanted to solve the problem, he would have dealt with the source of that problem, where this crystal methamphetamine comes from, triads, China, etc. In fact, that's what Mahathir Mohamad told me when I interviewed him. This is supposedly the dictator of Malaysia, right? He comes to the Philippines, and I thought, do you have any advice? What is your take on? He said, you don't need to kill people. Deal with the source of the problem. He didn't say China, but we all knew what he was mentioning. So this is Mahathir Mohamad, right?
Yeah.
The strongman of Malaysia saying, you don't need to go bara-bara and kill people and all of that. You have to deal with it in an intelligent way. Go at the source of the problem. Because sabi niya, it's also bad for business. If people are dying right and left, it makes your country look banana republic, which is... And then the other interesting thing I noticed, the biggest crime problem in the Philippines was actually homicide.
Yeah.
And guess what? This is the, no offense, this is the dumbest thing I've seen. When authorities claim crime is lowest ever, but homicide is highest ever. In what universe is a country with increased homicide rate a better place just because petty crimes went down? I mean,
Yeah.
that's really twisted, right? Like, ang ganda nga ng Pilipinas, bumaba yung pickpocket yung mga people, ganun. Ay, pero sorry lang, may nadagdag na 20,000 na namatay. Parang, homicide is the worst form of crime. And you're
Yeah.
telling me, I mean, it's like, that was like next level logic. Like, that's like
They're able to massage these things and present them to the public as facts. So that's, and the police is one of those who do that. So it's just nakakalungkot. So yeah.
But
So
nakakalungkot, Kaloy.
and the thing, yeah, go ahead.
No. So now we're critiquing yung kababalagan ni Digong. So in a way, we both agree na in a way it was quite a performative / scamish, policy. But of course, I also agree kasi as we speak, ang dami nagre-react dito. Actually, when I'm pressing it, some of them are trolls, obviously, but some of them are legitimate criticism. They're saying, okay, so essentially, ano yung solution natin? Now, obviously, talk about harm reduction and all of that. But it looks like before Duterte, yung issue ng krimen at droga, hindi masyadong napag-usapan, hindi binigyan ng sapat na attention. So may kasalanan din ng mga dating leaders, di ba? For everything we say na hindi naman totoo yung sinasabi ni Duterte, sinungaling siya na magiging Mexico na tayo, na-insult pa nga yung Mexico, but actually Mexico is really a narco state. We're never as bad as that. So Duterte clearly was manufacturing fear and new consensus. No question about it. But ano ba talagang dapat gawin natin para talagang kakaroon tayo ng solusyon dito sa suliranin na itong drug problem na to? What should be the package of policy solutions from a human rights watch, human rights activist point of view? Kasi our courts are broken, so some people were saying, ay, hindi pwede umasa sa due process kasi na-weaponize or na-hijack na yan ng mga mayaman na drug dealers, etc. So what is the multifaceted solution here, Kaloy, from a human rights watch and human rights activist, advocate point of view?
I mean, look, probably what we will I say in terms of harm reduction and human rights-based approach will, raise some eyebrows, given the fact that we've always been conditioned to think that the crime problem is so bad that it's destroying this country. But really, I can't think of anything else, any other way to approach the drug problem. Obviously, there's some law enforcement aspect of it because illegal pa rin naman ang drugs. Uh, but again, to me, the way they're doing it is the issue. The way there's no debate na kailangang i-address ang drug problem, but the way we do it should be in a right respecting way, harm reduction, kaya dapat i-promote yan. And also, we need to have a consistent and expansive effort to educate people about drugs. A more holistic way, hindi lang yung one-sided na pagtingin sa drugs na, oh, drugs, mga zombie yan, mga baliw-baliw yan, mga bangag yan, baka kung anong gawin sa'yo. No, hindi ganon. There are realities, and you adverted to this earlier, na mayroong mga taxi driver gumagamit ng drugs so they can drive longer hours because ang 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 pag-drive ng taxi, hindi madali kumita ng boundary mo. So you have to really work double time. And in fact, isa ito sa mga issues na hindi masyadong nababanggit pag pinag-uusapan yung droga na ginagamitan ng panakot. Yung economic situation ng mga gumagamit. Wala, ang gusto lang natin tanggalin yan sila, patayin yan sila, but we don't even stop to consider na baka itong mga gumagamit ng droga, karamihan sa mga pinatay sa drug war ay talagang mahihirap, ay merong mga circumstances that lead to this problem. And it's not just parang ang nilalabas kasi ng gobyerno dito is para ba ang paggamit ng droga is some leisurely activity na ginagawa lang ng mga walang mayayaman dyan sa Makati na walang magawa at nanggugulo lang. Parang ganun kasi minsan yung parang lumalabas sa discourse eh. But in fact, drug use is tightly tied into the economic and social realities of people, particularly in
Underprivileged communities, no?
poor communities, and that's the thing that I think the government needs to recognize and address before they start killing people. I mean, surely there will be times na magkakaroon talaga ng law enforcement operation na may magbarilan and everything dyan, but as we've seen, it's not. I don't think just shooting up people will solve this. I mean, even assuming that the drug war violence was justified, lahat ito mga nanlaban, or that the whole principle behind the drug war was legit, even assuming that, this is not the way to do it, I think. And we don't lack, scientific evidence about these things. Meron, if only the government there cares to look. And so I think ang danger dito is that somebody like Duterte comes along and then all bets are off. Do you really think that he's gonna be the last one to happen? I don't think so.
Well, the daughter
Unless
is a breath away, heartbeat away. So
Bro,
definitely no one is sleeping on
there
that.
you go. So in other words, Richard, I've been babbling here, but I don't really have
No,
like
no,
a
no.
one elevator pitch answer to your
But that's
question.
my point, Kaloy, eh. Kasi yun yung challenge sa atin, di ba? Whether as academics, advocates, ganun, every time we criticize Duterte, ang response repost is, okay, so anong solution mo? Because we have to admit, nakakulang din yung mga dating administration. But at the
Yeah.
same time, nag-exaggerate ng big time din si Digong. So maghanap tayo ng matinong sagot. Now, one reason, in fact, some people would consider Duterte and what he represents as fascism is because if you look at well, not fascism a la Second World War, but kind of a proto-fascism is yung complete disregard, if not disdain for facts and reason, and
Yeah.
complete reverence for action for the sake of action. Yeah, yung cult of
Extreme.
action. This is what Umberto Eco was a cult of action. Yung parang, ang dami kong narinig na, sige na nga Richard, kahit tanggapin ko lahat na sinabi mo tama, inabuso ng pulis, hindi totoo yung nanlaban, maraming nilagay sa drug list na hindi dapat nandun. Hindi naman talaga yun yung solusyon. Ang pinakahuling na narinig kong sagot is, at least may ginawa siya. Yung iba wala eh. So again, that for me is a proto-fascist mindset, which is action for the sake of action.
But if you turn it head, it can be, I think, it can have some potential. At least may ginawa siya. So, halimbawa, sabihin natin, si Marcos ngayon, sasabihin niya, oh, may ginawa siya na something different, something that might work, something that's more respectful of rights, then I guess that goes to the heart of how some Filipinos, some of us, view our leaders. Is that kailangan umaksyon ka, whether it results in something good or bad. Mas maigi na yon na umaksyon ka kaysa nakatunganga ka lang dyan. And this is of course the albatross on Pinoy's neck at some point. Although that's not a very fair kind of
I mean, he had a
accusation
lot to
against him.
deal with, including corruption by Arroyo and all of that. I kind of buy also that argument. Ang dami sakit ng ulo ng Pinoy. By the time he came in, the Marcoses and all were out of his view. It was really Arroyo he had to deal with. I want to go to the last part of our discussion. Wow, more than an hour just went like that. Now let's talk about BBM and also what has to be done with Digong. One reason I wanted to talk to you, Kaloy, is because you have been among few authoritative sources who has been reminding us that, uy, masyado kayong natutuwa kay BBM. Parang, okay, he's definitely not turning out like his father. He's definitely not turning out like Tatay, Digong. But it's not like nawawalang extrajudicial killings. It's not like nawawalang human rights violation. Kanina, you were talking about even in Pinoy's time, there were
Yeah.
some of these incidents and all of that, although never at the same scale. Can we talk about the human rights situation under BBM?
Yeah, sure. In fact, here's the thing. The killings, drug-related killings are still happening, okay? The HAS of the Third World Study Center has this running monitoring of the. Admittedly, it's not as bad as before. Minsan tatlo lang sa isang linggo, minsan 15. So it varies, but it's still happening. You know why? Because the drug policy, as it was handed down in 2016, is still there. It has not been rescinded. So, and I don't know.
Di ba BBM said he wants more harm reduction, right? That's what he said openly.
A paradigm shift. But yun ang sinasabi naman namin. Okay, you can say these things, but what have you done to, to walk the walk? Because you've talked the talk and not walk the walk. So, but wala pa. Walang nangyayaring any order rescinding all of the directives from the police and even from Malacanang on the drug war. Andiyan pa rin siya.
So
And
bakit
he has
siya ina-attack ng mga DDS na bangag daw siya, pulvoronic daw siya, pro-drugs daw siya?
ayan na naman tayo sa mga paggamit ng mga ganyan mga epithets.
Well, I'm being
Hindi.
sarcastic, obviously, but
Yeah, I know. But I've seen that. We've seen that. But yun eh. So ang challenge ngayon kay BBM is to really, make good on those pledges. And also the importance of communicating publicly to the police and to the law enforcers that those times of so much violence in the drug campaign is over. But we have not seen him do that. He just said something general like no more killings, no more, but really telling the PNP chief, oy, wala na yung mga ganyan drug
so
raid na
performative siya. I want to push you on
performative.
this, Kaloy. Sorry if I'm interrupting kasi you're making a very important point. Hindi naman ako tulfo, but maraming times na biglang may mga lumalapit sa akin ng tao nagbibigay ng information sa akin. Quite credible, no? Like biglang uyo, di ba? Prof, di ba? One of the things I was told was there are people in Napolcom who are holdovers from Duterte time who are
Yeah,
still, digging in their heels. What is your
yeah,
understanding of that aspect? Holdovers from Duterte time, including some who don't want to be pushed out. So yun ang
yeah.
problema daw ni BBM. Ayaw umalis yung ibang DDS na nandyan sa Napolcom or whatever.
I don't doubt that for a second. I mean, these are career officials. I mean, and it would be unfair to them to basta na lang silang tanggalin, di ba? There has to be a process. There has to be due process. The government should be mindful about that. But there are other things that it can do. It's not just only, baguhin yung leadership ng PNP or ng NAPOLCOM, but even just to, really tawag dito, gawing totoo yung pagsabi na hindi na wala ng patayan ay importante 'yon.
So ang
Kasi
sinasabi mong Kaloy is scam yung drug war ni Digong tapos scam yung sinasabi ni BBM na hindi na yung drug war ni Digong yung ginagawa ko. It's like scam
hindi kasi
squared.
pa obviously. But another parameter here, Richard, that you have to take into account is that in terms of accountability, mas doon pa ako nag-aano sa accountability. Because people expected I mean, we were skeptical about BBM given his history, right? But in accountability, you would expect him na ngayon, lalo na ngayon na medyo nagkakalabuan na sila ng mga Duterte, na medyo umano siya ng konti in terms of investigating the cases and really, really going hard on police officers who might be, involved, and also yung prosecution, investigation and prosecution. Majority of the cases since 2016, a huge majority are still uninvestigated. So to be actually, ang tingin ko, ang suspecha ko diyan, the police, even if they wanted to do right by BBM and start investigating all the cases, they don't have a lot on their table to start the process. Because
What do you
nung
mean?
panahon ni Digong, hindi nag-iimbestiga. To give you one example,
So may
ang
black hole.
oo, huli kong ginawa na report for Human Rights Watch was the impact of the drug war on children. So I interviewed about more than 50 respondents ng mga families. And every interview I did, I specifically asked them, binalikan ba kayo ng police or ng isang law enforcement agencies para tanungin kayo, una ng affidavit, tanungin kayo sa nangyari? Not one of them said yes. Ibig sabihin, a lot of these cases talagang hindi pinansin. Tapos may iba pa nga na pina-falsify yung mga document as we've shown. Now, ito yung sinasabi ko lagi, kaya ako nabubuisit, sorry, dun sa Senado na laging sinasabi ni Bato na bakit hindi kayo nag-file ng case telling the relatives of the victims, right? Para namang napakadaling mag-file ng case sa Pilipinas. Unang-una, hindi trabaho ng mga biktima mag-file ng case, trabaho ng pulis na mag-imbestiga, trabaho ng prosecutor na mag-file ng case. Pero yun nga, hindi nangyayari, hindi ginagawa. Tapos ngayon ang mga biktima ang i-blame nila, di ba? So yung ganon. Merong dapat gawin si BBM in terms of doing that. So ang isa pa niyang kayang gawin na dapat niyang gawin, yun talaga sweeping reforms sa law enforcement agencies, police,
DILG, malaking role siguro ng DILG nun.
LG.
Si
Kaya nga,
Remulla ngayon, yeah.
yung dalawang Rimulya na yan, tag team niya actually sa DOJ tsaka DILG in terms of accountability. Let's hope na they can deliver. I mean, in fairness to Crispin Rimulya, since naupo yan siya, he has done some things na medyo okay naman, like, easing up the jails. Kasi nga, puno na ng mga nahuli yan sa drug war. Finding ways to try to improve the bail system that we have para ma-decongest.
Right, yung mga ganyan reforms, no?
Oh,
Low-hanging
mga
fruits pa rin important.
mga less controversial obviously, but at least meron, sabi nga, low hanging fruits, and ano pa sila, they engage a really respected prison reform expert in the person of Dr. Raymond Larag. You must know him. His so those things meron naman. Pero in terms of accountability, in terms of making sure that families have redress, for instance, wala pa. Pare ang access to
That's a
justice in the
very that's a very important point. That's a very actually may nag-comment pa nga dito, kapatid din daw niya yung kaso niya walang follow-up. So actually as you speak, there are people are reacting and sharing their own life story. So this goes to the last part. ICC. Do we need
yeah.
ICC to come in? Do you think ICC will eventually come in? I mean, I confirmed when I was at The Hague that some feelers are being sent. Now, I cannot say more, and obviously there's still negotiations behind the scenes. But from what you understand, how important is for the ICC to come in? Because ang sinabi mo, yung police, they didn't even do their job of following up. In fact, I heard even worse, na tinetretan pa yung iba na, wag kayong
Yeah,
magsalita.
yeah.
I mean, there's a risk. You wanna complain? Baka mamaya mayari ka pa eh. Ipaplant ka lang nila ng drug, di ba? I mean,
I mean,
as you
even to
said,
this
wala
day,
pang reform.
pumunta ka sa mga community, takot pa rin ang mga tao. And then you have prosecutors na nagpapasign ng mga waiver, yung mga ganun. But
Fear
anyway,
factor.
yung sa ICC, I think it's imperative that the ICC should come in, should really continue with this investigation. Now, isa yan sa mga challenge kay BBM actually, na kailangan niyang mapakita sa international community na nagko-cooperate siya sa ICC. And at some point, pag okay na, balik niya tayo sa Rome Statute. Kasi wala namang dahilan kung bakit wala tayo dun eh. Andun na tayo, tapos napaka-self-serving obviously yung pag-withdraw natin. No? Pero uh, tawag dito, the ICC, hindi ko alam kung nasaang actual stage na sila ng investigation, but I know that they've gotten a lot of information, a lot of cases, may mga witnesses na sila. So this is a process that's continuing, and I don't think it will drop this, the ICC will drop this, just because may Congress hearing, may Senate hearing. And
But
actually,
didn't Duterte actually help the ICC case? I mean, we had Justice Carpio here. He said,
there you
well,
go.
that's evidence that testimony by Digong. He essentially incriminated himself. He
Yeah,
admitted na he's setting up these criminals for essentially the non-laban scenario.
yeah, exactly.
CJK.
Yeah, exactly. So, tingin ko mangyayari whether mag-cooperate si BBM or not. And I think we should welcome that because frankly, sira ang this might need a little unpacking because the government always says, or the Digong part always says, the criminal justice system in the Philippines works. Okay, you know what? If you're rich, of course it works. But if you look at the majority of victims of the drug war, sila nga ito mga kawalang-wala, walang access sa lawyers, walang access, walang pera papunta ng ano, wala talagang zero almost access to justice, and there have been studies confirming this. So, dahil doon, ang accountability mechanisms natin, such as it is, are really, really poor. Ano ba nangyari? DOJ, wala. Ilan na ba kaso ang iniimbestigahan nila? Wala pang ilang dosena pa lang yata out of the thousands. Na-convict, apat pa lang. Ang ombudsman for the military and law enforcement agencies, which is supposed to be looking into this, are practically non-existent. Wala silang ginagawa. AFP Human Rights Office, PNP Human Rights Office, those are non-entities as far as accountability is concerned in the drug war killing. So, in other words, wala ka nang maasahan domestically for accountability. So, pupunta ka talaga sa ICC. Wala kang choice. So, just this whole thing about complementary, that's a lot of BS. That doesn't apply here. So, ang ano dito is that if
Essentially, you're
BB
saying that domestic institutions are either unwilling or incapable. Incapable doesn't make
exactly
sense because we're not a failed state. It's not like we're Afghanistan or Somalia in the middle of war. So it's more of the unwilling, right? I mean, that's the only way to explain. Bakit out of thousands, if not tens of thousands, apat lang nagkaroon ng resolution or few dozen lang in-investigate. So that means there's something systemic. There's a problem. There's a pattern. There's something going on. There's a sabotage, right?
targeting a specific set of people, poor drug users. So, problema yan. So again, babalik tayo kay BBM. Kung talagang seryoso siya about this, he needs to walk the walk and not just talk the talk.
Speaking of talking the talk and putting himself in trouble, we started this this whole conversation by talking about how intelligent, Machiavellian, and cunning Duterte is. Yes, I agree to that maybe before, but increasingly I'm also willing to accommodate the possibility that Digong is also digging his own grave. Well, not grave, sorry. Digging his own, well, whatever you want to call. Because mukhang the hubris, precisely
Oh
because
yeah,
of his political success, because he has been in power for so long. We know it. Even the best of the best, absolute power corrupts absolutely, including your smartness, right? He
yeah.
has been so much cloistered from criticism. He has been so much in power. You could see it. He was talking in the Senate as if he's still the president. The way he
Uh,
would go into this rant mode and talk down, he was interrupting even Coco Pimentel as if he's a nobody. Ayaw na tapusin. Hindi, magsasalita ako. That's hubris to me. He doesn't seem
yeah,
to understand. Tapos na yung panahon nila, hindi na sila nasa poder. Baka ma-impeach pa nga yung anak niya eh.
that's true. But also on the other hand, let's not give all the credit to Digong. I think BBM is also very, very Machiavellian in many
I'm
sense.
not
So
gonna say that because they're gonna say I'm Ilocano. I didn't say, well, as a former professor of mine said, good Machiavelli daw siya. Good Machiavelli.
well, he's a bad guy. He's our bad guy. Parang ganon.
He is our Machiavelli.
Okay.
Yan, matatroll na naman tayo ng mga ka-DDS. Yung mga DDS na todo BBM, tapos ngayon biglang galit na galit sila kay BBM. Talagang speaking of hypocrisy. Last point, I also asked this Manny. Well, Manny told me like he was so traumatized at some point na nagkaroon pa siya ng heart attack, di ba? Nung bumalik siya from Yolanda, di ba? And he was talking about how Reuters provides them essentially R&R and detox, no? Considering how stressful the job is. All of us have had to do our own survival kit strategy, di ba? Nako, nag-yoga, your MMA, whatever. Practically half exiled nung panahon ni Digong. What is your coping mechanism, Kaloy, and what gives you hope? What gives you hope? What keeps it going?
I'm still actually trying to explore ways of doing that. But mainly since all of these things happen, I've begun to like cook a lot for my family. So that's one thing. Uh,
Yung
uh,
pala
and,
dapat vlog mo eh. Dapat ba food vlogger ka na?
and also I've gotten into biking, so that's good as a form of exercise. And I do a lot of ngayon nga yung weekend project ko lagi yung podcast ko, but let's see how it goes. But there's a lot of ways to do that. But again, you find out that like in the past week na mag-testify si Digong, you get sucked into all of that thing again. And to be honest with you, Richard, right now, I feel like I have PTSD after that Senate hearing. And I think I'm not the only one who said that, to use that this acronym. It's just so bad because it's not just even deja vu, this cruel sense of deja vu that he again elicited out of that Senate hearing. So we cope in our own ways. I mean, I have different ways of doing that. So I've seen all of that. But I think the best way is to, if you're going to cope with something as stressful as this one, do it that benefits, I suppose, not just yourself but also your family. So I do that by a lot, by cooking and just cooking and experimenting with other stuff in the kitchen.
That's a great advice. Definitely, I think also for me, solidarity matters a lot. No, I think one of the most difficult thing during the time of Digong was how lonely it was. I think all of us were like being attacked, almost like we were being picked apart, right? And I remember when one troll would attack me, suddenly it's all of them attacking me. Obviously, there was orchestrated aspect, and then parang we were all being essentially gunned down in isolation, right? So I'm glad that
Yeah.
now, because of this podcasting and all of this, medyo nagkakaroon na tayo ng solidarity. And I don't know, honestly, for me, therapeutical. Speaking of PTSD, I mean, obviously, I'm traumatized. All my cars are tinted. I would always, if a motorbike passes, I still get jitters until today.
I'll
Uh,
give you one funny story on that, Richard,
please,
on the
please,
podcast.
please.
It's so funny because I started this some months ago pa, na iniisip ko na talaga. So I started recording myself even when I was walking or even when I was out, and then just mumbling to myself, parang may dadaya ko, baka magamit ko to sa podcast ko at some point. And then I realized later that para akong nagsa-self-therapy, just talking about stuff that, uh, you
100%.
know, it's actually kaya nung ma-realize ko yun, sabi ko, sandali, baka kailangan ko na ng professional therapist. But anyway, that's just the thing.
Absolutely. I mean, processing is very important. Kasi kung hindi mo ma-process yan, magkukumpul-kumpul yan eh. It's gonna come back to haunt you. Uh,
Yeah,
Ako, some people were telling me, Richard, bakit parati parang Karen ka? Sabi ko, I'm a good Karen, but you're right. Part of me being Karen is because I'm so frustrated and angry with so many things going wrong back in the day. So konting may makita naman akong inis, nagka-Karen na naman ako, di ba? But yeah, so that's why I think we have to be self-aware na lahat tayo scarred, no? We're all emotionally scarred by those days kasi it's a tough job. Falling a
yeah.
very very difficult thing. In our case kasi pati West Philippines Sea din. I mean, actually that's my primary job. China and all of that. That was also very stressful, di ba? Pero kapalmoks tayo, kapalmoks tayo. Kaloy, last point, is there any recent report or writing from Human Rights Watch or something relevant to our discussion that you want people to listen to? I heard again some of the people saying, oh, wala naman kayong binigay na solution. Are there certain writings, certain case studies that people have to research about para magkaroon sila ng, para mamulat, no? What's the way forward?
So we always put out like statements and press releases about our points, our advocacy points. So it's on our website, hrw.org. You can search it there. It's all there about including these calls to BPM and solutions, possible solutions to the problem. But the last report I did was a month or so ago. It's about the red tagging of union leaders in the Philippines. So that's still a problem. So they can look it up on the website, and there are a ton of stuff there. And there's a thing with our job. I mean, tayo kasi dati, ako, when I was a journalist, and this is probably one of my misgivings, is that we only report what is happening or what was told us. We don't do recommendations. We don't tell the government na ganito dapat gawin. But now with this,
Policy recommendation.
yeah, with this job, meron kaming recommendation section palagi. We always make it a point. Okay, there's the problem. This is how it happened. This is what you should do. So, ganon. So, andun yon. If you care enough to read the stuff that we put out on the Philippines, you will see it there.
On that scholastic note, like, mamaya mag-post ako ng review of related literature there. No, but I just want to tell people we're not just here criticizing. Actually, mahabang usapan yung mga solutions and all of that. And there are many reports that people can read. So please don't think we're just criticizing for the sake of it, because we know there's a better alternative. And for anyone who knows it, I mean, like, the worst thing a doctor can do to a patient is to misdiagnose the problem and give the wrong medicine, because that's even worse than the disease itself. And that's exactly what happened with Digong. Even if I were to agree that we had some serious problem with war and criminality, his was the proverbial medicine that literally killed thousands of people, and that's why we have to have this kind of conversation. So, Kala, I hope this is just the beginning of more conversation for time to come, and hopefully next time tayo we can be in studio together with Ronald and the rest, because mahabang-habang usapan yan. This is, I think, speaking of PTSD, I think it will take some time before the whole nation, may collective PTSD yata tayo, di ba? I mean, let's be honest. Lahat tayo traumatized. The country was traumatized by this. Whichever side you are in, this is a very taxing situation. But as if that were not enough, abangan ng US elections. I think it's going to be the craziest US elections to
Sure.
come by every
Okay.
indicator. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Stress,
It's a
stressor.
it's
But this has been fun, Richard. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. This has been fun. This has been very, very illuminating as well. And yeah, I hope we can do this again. And you know where to reach me.
Yeah, definitely. Let's make this the free therapy. This is my Ilocano solution to our PTSD. Salamat kapatid. Have a good day, Kaloy.
Salamat
Good
din.
day. Salamat. God bless po.